Hello everyone, welcome to TEDx at the University of Sydney. Welcome along to this talk, Ideas Worth Sharing, where we're going to be looking at startups and entrepreneurialism and all that kind of stuff. We actually have, let's go through our speakers today. We have, speaking of Google, Sally Ann Williams, Engineering Community and Outreach Manager in Google's Sydney offices, responsible for Google's relationship with startups and universities across Australia and New Zealand. Oversees Google's efforts in entrepreneurship and startup engagement. Has recently been working on hashtag Startup Oz.
So a lot of what I do is support academics. We run research award programs where we give unrestricted grants to around the world to academics doing stuff in really interesting areas and support them and support PhD students. And then there's just a whole host of things like partnering on events like this. So it's lots of fun. Excellent. Okay, next to Sally Ann is Whitney Komor. Now, of course, today is all about not encouraging you to join Google, but, create the next Google instead. Absolutely.
So Whitney's on the way to that. She's a recent arts graduate from the University of Sydney and founder and CEO of TheBestDay. Whitney successfully raised $1.1 million in Series A funding and now has a team of 4 developing a new global platform for social planning and group bookings. Whitney, please explain, what is TheBestDay going to do?
All right, TheBestDay is going to be the new global platform for groups to make plans more easily than that back and forth messaging chaos that we go through on Facebook inbox messages and email chains trying to coordinate when everybody's free and where we want to go. We want to build a more effective way for groups to agree on the details and then make their plans happen. And so that's like the vision for TheBestDay. You make it sound more like further along than it is.
No, don't say that in front of Sally Ann, okay? So
you're doing great, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's like an improved Google Wave type thing, yeah? Is that right?
Yeah, it's basically the next Google for sure.
Yeah, okay. All right, we have Dr. Russel J. Howard, originally from Melbourne. Russel cut his teeth as a biochemist, studying algae and then malaria, but I'm told he's cured, before moving into biotechnology. As an entrepreneur, he built successful companies in California, from the startup stage to listing on the NASDAQ, and he now resides in Sydney. Can you give us a quick idea of, that sounds like fairly research-intensive startups. Is that where your kind of expertise lays?
Yeah, I'm a life science guy, so wet labs guy, not IT, not communications. It's taking science from the life sciences, chemistry, biochemistry, or material science in my latest clean tech startup, and turning science into technology, and then recognizing what way the technology can go to make a product, and then the long haul in the wet sciences of taking a product concept through development to finally reach the market. So very different to IT and communications. Hundreds of millions of dollars over 5 years minimum, more likely 15, in order to create a product concept.
So it's not an app, people, okay? We get that. We'll get into the difference between that kind of long-run entrepreneurship as we go. And we have finally Professor Tony Weiss, who is the professor at the University of Sydney, startup company founder and serial inventor. He leads the world in making elastic tissue components that repair the human body. So that's where your startup area is. And have your startups been done in Australia? Or
yeah, we have. That's right. So basically, although I'm trained here and overseas, the startups here are homegrown startups. You can do it over here, folks. It can be done. Great investors, great people involved in the process, and just bring it through such that we hope to have stuff in the market in Europe next year.
Fantastic. So this is like, just quickly explain, tissue components to repair the human body. So it's kind of it's like man-made tissues that grow in place of human skin. Is that?
Yep. We're basically making bits and pieces, almost if you like plug-in parts to sort of repair bits and pieces that break down in people, either through surgery or trauma, some sort along the way, disease. And we've come a long, long way to making that all happen now. Quite intricate parts that really resemble and behave like many parts of the body now.
So they've moved on from just putting ears on the back of mice, that kind of stuff.
It's good. They can't even hear you that well.
They can't even hear you.
Call them,
this is the second. This is a great. These mice can hear you. No, okay. So now I want to start with. Today's all about ideas worth sharing, and I want to firstly ask, just for people sitting here who might think I've got an idea, I want to kind of ask, how do you know you've got a good idea? How do you know you're the first with it? And does that even matter at all? Does it matter if you're the first or the fifth or the 10th person to have this idea? I'll start with this side of the room.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I believe that a lot of the good idea side of things basically is a sense of passion. You somehow have a sense that something's right. And it's that passion that tends to drive you forward. You know, for example, if you feel that you can, for example, do something to help people or things like that, somehow it just clicks. You just know that's the right thing. And a lot of the time it's almost a belief. You know, you hang on to that and then try and make it into something dramatic. And I think it's that combination of belief and logic that makes the whole thing really click. And the whole, if you like, the cogs to whir around and the bells to whistle and, or ring and whistle. Yeah.
So with that, I mean, Russel, for instance, I get the sense that you guys are dealing with ideas that you probably know a lot of the other people who are working in that area, and it's fairly professional, and you know, you understand, you go to conferences and talk about those kind of things. Whereas, is that still a problem? Are you kind of hiding your ideas from the next person, thinking, you know, I've got to get this, be the first one to get this idea started, or how do you share your ideas and still protect what you think is, you know, your great flash of brilliance?
Well, you've mentioned two critical things. There's having the idea, and then there's thinking about, do I want this idea to ever get funded? And if I want the idea to get funded, you need to patent it. I'm not in the freeware business. When you're going to invest hundreds of millions of dollars to make a product, you don't spread it around and tell everybody else. You have to patent it so that whoever then invests the hundreds of millions is able to enjoy patent exclusivity on the outcome. So that's just a fundamental thing in the life sciences. It's not $2 million to get to the marketplace, it's 500 or more. So if you're going to invest that, you have an idea, you enable it to whatever extent you can with a little bit of money, you write the patents, you then try and get the money based on the patents and the germ of the enablement in order to get more money, and then you can start talking about it. It's the reverse of what you just said. Yeah,
well, that's what I've always wondered. I mean, let's go to the more online experience of that. So, Whitney, you've had this idea. Have you patented this idea? Can you patent this idea, or is it totally different when you're looking in that kind of internet apps style sphere?
Yeah, as far as I know, it's totally different to the real high-tech, you know, expert knowledge on the other side of you. For me, one thing I've learned over the course of working on TheBestDay is that I'm no genius to think that group planning sucks. That I'm sure 20 other teams around the world are working on this exact idea right now, and that in my sector, the only thing that's going to matter is who can actually execute on that in a way that really solves a problem. I don't think that I'm the first to try and do it. I know that there are other businesses that have tried before and never got there. So for me, it's not about spending my money trying to patent some version of how I've applied this idea. It's really about spending money to try and be the first to really solve it. So that would be my take.
I guess that's the Google experience. I mean, it's not like there weren't search engines out there. It wasn't like you went, oh, damn, somebody came up with search engines already. We'd all be using Alta Vista soon, still. You too young. No, people know Alta Vista still. That's great. Is anyone still using? No. So it's really in that particular sphere. It's not about I mean, does Google even patent things, or is it about maintaining that market dominance and maintaining the best product as you go?
Look, I think it's a couple of things, and patents aside, because patents definitely exist in the online space and software space for everybody. But one of the things that's really interesting to think about is that idea. How do you know if your idea is a good idea? Well, if you're talking about a technology space and you're talking about something that you're wanting to put online, a website or an app or something that is in that space, actually to test that and validate that is actually really easy. And a lot of times it's fairly free. It's your time and your commitment to building that, and then, you know, running a couple of tests with your friends and saying, is this something you would use or isn't it? We don't have that long investment of, you know, $500 million necessarily at the start. So you can validate your idea. One of the things that we also do is, I think Whitney said this really well, somebody else out there is going to be guaranteed to working on something similar to your idea. I just came back from London and I was at Campus London, which is our sort of startup space over in London, and there's a number of incubators in there. And I met with a lot of the startups, and it was amazing how many of them had same ideas to what people are working on here in Sydney, to what people are working on there in Silicon Valley and elsewhere around the world. And I think the two key things for you to think about is if you're going to go ahead and do a tech startup and you're going to do something in the online space, you know, it's not always about being first to market. Google search, as you pointed out, Craig, was not first to market, but you need to be good. You need to be really solving the problem like what Whitney said, and you need to be doing it in a way that people find amazing and a seamless experience. You know, there's no excuse in this day and age for something that has bad UI or has a bad user experience and that users can't navigate your product or it's too tricky. So it's actually about giving that amazing experience to your users and listening to that feedback. So my advice is tell as many people as you can about what you want to do and hone that in as you start developing it.
Well, that's I guess the question with this ideas worth sharing is that how do you kind of do that networking and protect your idea and get it started? Is it about just talking to as many people? Is that the kind of approach you took, Whitney?
Well, for me, I remember when I first started, I thought this was so awesome. I was like, I'm going to kill it. I'm going to be the next Facebook. And I didn't really tell anyone about it. And then that was actually a really big problem because I sat in my little cave building this thing and not actually talking to people enough about how they would want to use this. So that at the end of building the first version, way too much money in, we first were like, ta-da, what do you guys think? Like, would you use this? And I needed to have been talking as much as possible from the beginning to understand what people would want in the solution. So for me, absolutely, I think you need to talk from the beginning. And if anyone is going to, like, no one else probably has your passion or commitment that you tell the idea to actually go ahead and try and catch up and build this thing.
Just quickly, because I want to go back to the kind of the overseas experience over here as well, but just in terms of that, you were just saying when you were in the UK, a lot of people had the same idea and they were doing similar things to here in Australia. With that kind of online space, which is obviously interconnected, is there any kind of advantage, you know, if you're in the UK or the US, you're obviously, in the old sense of the word, you're in a bigger market. Does that matter at all now, or is there any disadvantage to being sitting over here in Australia or Sydney and starting off and not, you know, your local market being smaller, or is it so interconnected that that doesn't necessarily matter?
So I think there's a couple of things. You're absolutely right, the market is bigger elsewhere. If you're starting a tech startup in Australia today and you're not thinking globally, right from the get-go, you're setting yourself up for failure. And I will put that out there and stand behind that. There is no reason that you should not be developing a global product. And it's, funnily enough, that's not unique to Australian developers thinking that way. Somebody in London was doing exactly the same thing. He was thinking about his product locally, and I said, why wouldn't you try doing this in Australia? We would love this right now. If you were able to go to market right now, I would use your app. I would use this thing on my phone. But because you're only thinking about London, I can't do that. So I think there's advantages and disadvantages. I think Whitney highlighted something really important. It's critical to not stay in your cave. So if you're thinking globally and you're building for a global marketplace, the more people that you can network with and share your product at early stages, at beta testing stages, the better, because you're going to build that as a global market. Shoes of Prey, who knows Shoes of Prey here? So great Aussie success story. Now they're in the online space. Now they're actually selling a physical product, but it's an amazing experience. They made the decision to stay in Sydney for lifestyle reasons, yet hundreds of their customers are overseas and they're doing really well. So there's been no disadvantage for them at all. So it depends on the person, but you should think of yourself as globally connected and work that way.
So to go to Russel and Tony, I guess because you guys are in that slightly more specialised area and requiring an enormous amount of investment in those things. Now, I think the traditional perception of that is that, you know, if you have an idea of that scale, you've got to go to San Francisco, you've got to go overseas somewhere there to actually get yourself into the areas where you're going to be able to get that kind of funding. What has your experience been? Is that still the case to a point, or is that changing?
Well, actually, I guess that, in my case, I believe it's changing, but I think also one of the benefits in the area that I selected, which is more devices, making things that you know, you can pick up and handle, tends to keep the cost down. You know, there are many steps, as Russell was implying a short while ago, in terms of the process of success in this. And one of those steps involved with success is really what the costs are downstream, what the risks are. And of course, as you expose yourself to more risk over a longer period of time, then it's a much harder process to ensue because it also consumes more money. The whole thing is stirred in one single pot. From my perspective, anyhow, we've been able to keep the costs down by emphasising this device path to things. And actually, we have been able to make things work here in Australia with a lower level of funding base.
And your investors predominantly Australian who are investing?
The investors predominantly Australian for the one startup that I'm talking about now. For some of the subsequent stuff, the world's, as we discussed, a very small place after all. You know, when you sit here way down under, you know, sometimes you think it's a big world out there, but actually it's not. It's just one flight away to many things right now. And you know, we're all much more connected now than ever before. So the reality is that you know, as we've been discussing, you know, people over there think locally, sometimes don't think globally. Same thing for us over here too. But you've got to think in a world sense, and if you do that, it does shrink the world very, very quickly for you.
So Russell, what's your experience? Because you've lived in San Francisco, you're now back in Australia. Does it really essentially not matter where you are? You know, is it just kind of where you're living, or do you think that for certain things you do need to be in San Fran or somewhere else?
It matters in our space. I cannot comment really on the Australian scene, other than noting that I know for sure I could not have done what I did in the United States here. I raised hundreds of millions of dollars for a platform technology before there was a single product concept, but was able to describe to very savvy investors, the like of which you don't have here in quality or quantity or access to money, the vision of a technology, and then take the technology into agriculture, the chemicals business, protein pharmaceuticals, vaccines, and enzyme manufacture. All of those things you could only do sitting on the East Coast or the West Coast US. Not even in Europe you could do that. So the ability to raise a lot of money for something very big, unless it's in mining, I wouldn't try and do it in Australia.
Is it just a question of the money involved, or is it, there's often this perception of a different culture or attitude to failure in Australia when it comes to entrepreneurialism. There's this notion that's kicked around that, you know, if you fail in Australia, it's like, well, you wouldn't go back to that person, whereas in America, it's just like, well, that's your first step in the learning process. You got to fail first. Is there that cultural element, you think, or is it just essentially that there's a lot more people with money who have experience in those particular areas?
You've mentioned two important things. One is money and the smart money. There's dumb money, and there's lots of that in the United States, much more than here, and there's smart money that comes with other attributes. Someone who puts in $10 million that brings you a lot of other qualities and experience to the new board of a little company that really helps you along. So there's both of those, much more in the United States. And next, I really can't comment on the Australian culture because I've been away so long, but I am a little chastened by the fact that the tall poppy syndrome is still alive and well here. And Australians have a problem with people who work hard on weekends, with people who are intense and passionate about their work and don't want to go out drinking 5 nights a week, with people who don't do sport 3 days a week. I mean, I'm that kind of guy. And here, I had troubles before I left, and I can still tell that's a problem here. Whereas if you're over in San Francisco or in Boston or in Seattle, and you're in the tech business, everyone says, wow, that's your choice, great. If you want to do sport, that's also cool. But there's never a negative perception of a person who wants to go 200% into doing something that they're really passionate about that has got nothing to do with other people, and that's growing a business. And if you're going to do that, then the US environment is very powerful for that. It takes the passion that was mentioned, it takes dedication, persistence, being able to fail and pick yourself up again, and I think the US is a much more supportive environment for that than Australia. That's a sad truth.
So how do we then cultivate that? And I guess there's, I mean, here at Sydney University is the Incubate scheme, which is trying to grow that, trying to grow, you know, say to people who are still studying here or are now researching here, say, look, you shouldn't be going to try and get a job. You should be trying to go out there, start your own business and that. How do you think we create that community? Open to anyone. How do we start creating that community there?
It's
I mean,
here.
look, exactly.
It's the people in this room.
There are plenty of us nerds who don't mind not doing sport on the weekend. It's fine. Yeah.
I'd just like to take a counterpoint to some of that, because I do agree that there's definitely more money in the US and there's more people, more market. But one of the things that we have to realise, especially in the tech startup space that I'm in, is that in Australia, you know, 5 years ago, there was almost no angel investment groups at all. There wasn't a lot of funding, there wasn't, but there's been a massive change in that. Now every city has an angel investing group. Are they smart money yet? Some of them are still like learning what it's like to invest. These are people with money who want to invest in tech startups, who want to take a risk, but they're still learning about that investment process and what, you know, how to really evaluate a deal and term sheets and things like that. But there is a growth in it. In Adelaide last week, you know, we had a Chinese investor that's come out to Australia to see an incubation program there and brought a lot of very wealthy people from China who are wanting to invest in the tech startup space rather than real estate. So I think if you think about the startup ecosystem in Australia, think about it like a startup. You know, in those early days, there's been a few people that have been at it for a really, really long time, and the going on has been very slow, and there's been not a lot of excitement and enthusiasm and the culture of somewhere like the Valley in San Fran. But what's happening now is we're seeing this sort of up and to the right, and I'm going to the left here to hopefully go to the right for you guys. But we're seeing this growth curve. 2 years ago, there was no co-working spaces in Sydney. Now there's 7. There was none on the Gold Coast when I was growing up there. Now I found out there's 2 the other day, and I'm like, on the Gold Coast. That's amazing. Tech startup spaces for people to co-work. So I think the environment is changing in Australia, and it's changing rapidly, and we're going to start seeing that happen. I have great hope for this because I'm very passionate about it, and I'm very committed to helping it happen. But I have a great hope that we're actually going to see that sort of speed up that's happening in that growth trajectory, just like a startup itself, that's starting to get more people involved in the ecosystem and in the community, and success will breed more success.
Well, let's go. Whitney's got the example of, Whitney, you raised $1.1 million. I won't ask you if that was smart or dumb money in case your investors are watching this, but those are Australian-based investors that invested in it?
Yes.
And what is their story like? You know, how are they set up? How did you kind of go through the process of raising $1.1 million, which to me seems like a lot of money?
Yeah, well, initially I was actually only seeking to raise a couple $100,000.
Well, you stuffed up, didn't you?
Yeah.
Not good with numbers, obviously.
No, I was, and just quickly, I wanted to follow on from Sally's point that I definitely agree that there's been like a startup acceleration. I've noticed in the last few years of my adventure, literally, that the attitude of people to what I'm doing has so much changed. Like, I started working on it when I was still a marketing grad at Coke, and I remember when I left to focus on it full time, I used to say to people, oh, I'm working on this, and they'd be like, but what's your job? And I used to have to be like, it's okay, I'm still on long leave. And then they'd be like, okay, all right, like relaxed about it. And now I think with the Social Network movie, quite seriously, I think that planted the seed in a lot of people's minds of this could be something quite fun to do. And everybody feels like they have an idea, I think. I reckon everybody here has had some moment where they're like, that's it.
So but people have had the ideas, but the difference is, and by the way, there's a couple of mics around here, so if people want to ask questions, can you head to the mic and I'll throw it over to you. So there's a microphone, just, sir, can you stand up and point to the microphone? You're next to the microphone, just point to the microphone so people know that's the microphone. He's our microphone expert today. If anyone wants $1 million in his microphone acknowledging technology, just see him afterwards.
Yeah.
But so obviously a lot of people have ideas and there's more people who might be wanting to get into it, but you know, as much as you can go into it, who are the people investing in yours?
Yeah, sorry,
you know, is it, who are those people? You know, if people were here wanting to contact these people, what do? They send out a tweet saying, hey, are you an investor? What's the story?
Yeah, that was your question, sorry. For me, it was a long process. I actually went to the US first because I was under the impression that that's where I'd need to go to get funding. I raised some angel money from, they call it family, friends and fools or some order like that. But I was at that point where I needed more investment to take what I'd managed to build so far to the next level. And I actually did a tour around the US, and the general advice I was giving from people I was meeting there was, you need to pack up and move here right now if you want to make this thing happen in America. And I had met with a couple VCs there that expressed early interest. And I came back here, and my story was, I happened to present at a group called Heads Over Heels, which is a women's business network. And at the end of your presentation, you make an ask of what you're looking for. And I was looking for introductions to investors and partner businesses. And in the audience happened to be the managing partner of a local VC group who came right up to me and handed me a business card and said, we'll do 500K into TheBestDay. And it happened like that. Obviously, the due diligence process, which is where they test whether what you've been saying is true, and you look at your financials and your customers, was a long, gruesome process. But it happened really fast. The following evening, I presented to a group called Sydney Angels, which is one of the angel investment groups Sally was talking about. And that's just this pool of individuals who want to invest anywhere from $10,000 to $100,000 into startups. And they offered a similar deal. And so essentially my story was I combined them and raised the $1 million.
Wow, it's a good story. The idea, though, it's interesting you talk about all the due diligence and all this kind of stuff, and I think this is one of the things with the notion of sharing ideas is actually about getting different expertises together. Like, I come from a legal background. If I ever have an idea, I'm like, I don't know what to do, I presume I need to find somebody who's in computer science or something. Are computer science students out there the same going, I need to find a lawyer or a business person, or are they just like, no, forget those people? But what is the, how do you find the people with the different expertise to you that have the same passion in the area that you want to work in?
Yeah, well, maybe I can just sort of add to that one, but just before I do that, if it's okay, I'll take the privilege also confirming what is the general theme right now. You know, within the biospace, for a long, long time, there really has been a question of funding and where do you go to. I still regularly go to the United States to sort of recharge my batteries interaction-wise. There is a buzz you get in the Valley, there's a buzz you get around Boston and so forth. It's amazing stuff. But also the fact is that there is a change in the air. You know, you can feel that change happening, as we've been discussing earlier on. And it's palpable, a very, very real event that's happening just over the last couple of years. You can feel the wind at your back right now. In terms of the stuff that we did specifically, it was really driven predominantly by people. It's the multiple interconnectedness of things. And so people need to connect as well. And so it's people who happen to come along, who share the vision, share the excitement, share the enthusiasm. And there is enough resource and abilities over here, but ultimately you still need to connect with people who are the best around. And the best around can be overseas and should be overseas as well. Australia fundamentally is still a very small fraction of the overall population of the world. The markets over here are what, a couple of % of the total world and things like that. It's really fundamentally important for us to engage dramatically. So to do that, you start from day zero, let alone day one, thinking globally. You know, you do bring in the people who are experts to start up. You bring in the people who are the lawyers, the investors and so forth who share that vision with you. And then from there you build something three-dimensional that actually lives and breathes as you carry it through.
A lot of these people sitting here probably have ideas and have very little money to do it. And that early stage where you're looking for different expertise, what does that mean? You know, do you set up a company and go, I'll give you 5% if you can do this or this, do this? Is that the way it works? Or is it, you know, are you trying to protect your idea? Or, you know, it's not everyone's got $1 million like Whitney over here. How do you get that team together initially?
Well, maybe initially you can actually ask Whitney to pay.
Depends on the space. On the right hand, we have folk that can raise $1 to $2 million and create a company and eventually produce a product, and that's brilliant, and sell the company for 100 million or 500 million. On this side, you have people that have to deal with chemistry, biochemistry, cells, and make stuff that is going to be approved for use in man or approved as an environmental technology to go into a factory or whatever, and that's a totally different world. So in my sphere, ideas have come, and I want to emphasize, I hope there are some chemists and biochemists and physicists and engineers in the audience, and that everyone isn't a computer person, because if you are, I'm talking double Dutch. But in the world of chemistry, physics, biology, there are brilliant people who slave away at the bench, and normally when they have an idea, it's within a pre-existing environment. I actually have built 2 companies out of a garage, and that's really tough and takes a long time. In general, ideas in chemistry, biochemistry, come in a person's head and they're working in a company, and they have an idea and they go to their boss and they say, is this idea going to fly within this company? And if the answer is yes, then they own it and it grows up in that company and might end up running 50 people and be famous inside the company. But if they're in a smart company on the West Coast and they say, I have an idea, I've written it up, boss, what do you think of it? The company will look at that idea and say, you know what, that's outside our territory. We're not going to run with that. Why don't we spin it out? And you either walk out with the intellectual property that's yours, or you might even get an investment of 1 or 2 or 10 million, as I've done before, from another company to help you spin out an idea. But in the hard sciences, ideas don't come out of garages generally. They come out of playing with stuff, that infrastructure, that costs 10 million to be playing with. And so you're usually within an environment, and then you burst out of that and create an idea. And that requires the same flexibility of thinking, only on a different time scale to on the right. So I've created companies with single individuals who've walked in and had an idea and then spun out. I've also, you know, said, go away, that's a dumb idea. So it's exactly the same space. Really smart people in a different set of sciences. Is
there an intellectual property issue there when you're in part of a company and you come up with an idea and you know, it may be, it's obviously linked to what you've been doing in that company there. Are you generally able to then go out yourself and spit it out?
Highly variable. Normally within a company, you sign over all of your rights to the field of that company, and that's totally appropriate. And literally they own your head 24/7. But most companies, at least in my experience in the United States, if you have an idea that's orthogonal, you go into them, and if they're smart enough, they'll either give you their blessing to leave or let you set up a skunk works within the company, which I've done several times, and then leave with a bit of money. People can be very creative, but Of course, if you work for a company, they own your output, and that's wonderful. As I said, you can grow brilliantly inside a company with your ideas. That's the whole point.
So if you for the kind of scientists here today and the engineers, if they have ideas, would you suggest they do go into a company, or they try and do it themselves? Does it?
My thesis is that in general, they will be doing it within an environment where there's the infrastructure, right? It's very hard to do it out of your garage. I've just sunk maybe $2 million in something that literally started in a garage and is now struggling along in California, where I'm running a clean tech company, and it'll be struggling until I can raise maybe 8 to 10 million. It'll never blow out until I can raise that amount of money, unlike this space.
Yeah. I was going to say that for me, I think that it wasn't like idea $1 million. It was 2 years of battling away to build enough of a product and show enough customer and user interest that I could prove that to investors at that point. And the biggest challenge for me to get there was to find the team. I unfortunately did not get interested in computer science in high school and did not do computer science at university. And so when I had this idea, I was completely unable to do anything about it myself. You're literally helpless unless you either learn to code or you find someone to join you quite genuinely as a partner, or you can be able to pay them a market rate developer's salary. And so it's a very difficult situation for non-tech people to have this idea and be able to build anything at all to show someone.
So I think, what was your experience? I think you said when you met somebody, at computer science who could work with you, it was like, great, I can finally do something. Is that?
Well, for me, I was in the fortunate situation that I did have access to some angel investment from the beginning. So I wouldn't have been able to do it without that, because I was able to pay a contractor ridiculous fees to build something that I could then work with to try and get some traction on. But most people don't have that luxury, especially like straight out of university. And so I would say that Sally's best to talk about this on how at university we can connect business-oriented, marketing-oriented people to actually know anybody in the engineering or computer science faculty, so that when either one of them has an idea and is looking for a friend from the different skills, that they're not helpless.
Maybe we shouldn't separate the bars like Manning and Wentworth. Yeah. Maybe we should bring them together. One bar. There you go.
I didn't know anybody who knew anything about computers.
But if I can answer that one realistically for you, because I actually think this is really, really important, and I get asked this all the time, and I get asked it the other way too. You guys are in Sydney. You have you have the biggest startup ecosystem in Australia in Sydney. We've measured it, we've mapped it, it's in a PwC report we put out. The numbers are in, and Sydney's doing great. Melbourne's doing awesome too, and there's lots of other places doing great, but Sydney is vibrant. It is happening. If you're not involved in the startup ecosystem here, if you're not going to Startup Weekend, you're crazy, quite frankly, because Startup Weekend is a fantastic place to go to meet people who are passionate about building a business. Now, your idea might not be the one that gets up. You might work on somebody else's. Does everybody know, does everybody know what Startup Weekend is?
Talk through Startup Weekend for those who don't know. Remember that anyone can ask a question, just come up to the microphone and I'll throw it to you. We all know where it is, it's fine.
So Startup Weekend, and they happen around Australia, so it's not just Sydney, but Startup Weekend is a fantastic weekend. It is a global organisation. It's run by volunteers and people that are passionate. But you literally go in on Friday, you pitch ideas, you get together in a team, and you hack over the whole weekend to build this idea, to build this business, to build this concept. And it's not just software engineers that are there. There are marketing people, there are business folks, there are people from around the ecosystem. The other thing that's amazing about these weekends that's really great is the mentors involved. We have people that go down from Google that hang out and mentor. There are a number of other incubation programs from around Sydney that send mentors to this. There are investors that go, that give of their time because they believe in growing the startup ecosystem in Australia and they want to see people succeed. So it's a great place to experiment. If you haven't started going to startup events, there's a Silicon Beach meetup group nearly every Thursday night, I think. You can, siliconbeach.org, I think it is. Join the Startup Australia community on Google+. Follow me on there, email me, tell me what you want to get into on there, connect with me. I'll send you a list of things that you can get involved with around Sydney and around Australia, because I think getting into that community and making those connections, which I think every single one of us has said, is critical to being successful, and it's critical to getting your idea heard, and it's critical to finding the team. And people are amazingly generous with their time. There are people that have got millions of dollars to give, but they will spend hours sitting there talking to startups and saying, look, here's the problem with your idea, and here's what you should think about, and here's what you consider. It's a generous community in terms of the time that people are willing to give in it. And they're very, very, very passionate, and you need to be in that environment to catch it and to thrive.
Can I just ask, with Google, you know, you kind of think, well, Google's going along and mentoring. You wouldn't think there's many areas that Google's not trying to work in. You know, it's such a large organisation. Does Google now find that a lot of the improvements or ideas come from internally, or is it still from, you know, buying external companies that start up, small startups and that kind of thing?
Look, I think some of our biggest and most audacious ideas are internal. Everybody knows about Glass, right? Google Glass?
Yes.
Yep.
Google
Everybody
Glasses.
knows about our self-driving cars. So we're doing some amazingly crazy things in the US that are really big bets. They're moonshots. Like, we're trying to do stuff that just changes the world, and we haven't really figured out where it's all going to go yet. So I think our biggest and our best ideas, so many of them are still inside of Google. What we have, and I think, you know, both of you guys alluded to this, is we have the opportunity to take that to our employers and say, I've got this crazy idea. And, you know, quite often we will get, you know, the blessing to go and work on it for a little while, and it's amazing. But that's not to say that the next big thing won't come from outside of Google. I hope it does. I hope it comes from somebody in this room. I hope somebody can tweet me, you know, in a month's time or a year's time and say, I was at that Ideas Festival, I was at TEDx, I heard you say go and start something, and look at what I've done. Because that is awesome when that happens, and it has happened.
All right, question from the floor.
Hey there, my name is Scott. I'm a presentation designer. I'm in my, I would say, within a year of my business. One thing I wanted to ask is, when was that moment that you guys moved out into an office or co-op space? Because I know, it still does require like some sort of finances, but I just wanted to know, when was that turning point that you guys were like, all right, we're going to move into an office?
Is that for me?
Are you in an office?
Anyone.
We're in an office, yes. That turning point for us was when we were 3 of us, because when it was just me and my first developer who was working with me as my tech partner, we made it work by meeting at cafes, meeting at pubs, like quasi-office, working from each other's houses. But we did find that it was forcing us to be apart too much, and so once there was the third person, we just needed a place where we could collaborate more. So we did work from fish burners for a while, and then now we have an office in Surrey Hills.
Can I just add to that? One of the things that I hear from everybody in the community is the power of being in the community. So at most of the co-working spaces around Australia, you know, by investing and being there, and it's not very expensive. Like, if you look up how much it costs to get into fish burners, it's pretty cheap for a hot desk there. But the advantages of being in a co-working space, especially if you're on your own or there's just 2 of you, if you're having a bad day, somebody else is having an amazing day. And, you know, hearing about their success and how they turned the corner and how they pivoted from their bad experience can really help. It's about that environment of creativity. It's about an environment of encouragement. There's stuff happening. There's experts through places like that all the time. And I just think if you invest a little bit of money, you've got skin in the game, right, to be there. And so you're going to want to make it succeed. But you're also just giving yourself a network effect. There's a reason at Google that we have free lunches and that we have food. And it's not just because they want to feed us well, but it is actually, so this is true. This is not a scam, I'm telling you this. Yes, we get the free lunch and we get breakfast and all these things, but it's about the idea of people connecting. So when you're sitting down and having lunch, or you're in the lunch queue, you're talking about ideas, you're talking with your colleagues about your working on, you're generating momentum in your projects. And I think that same thing happens when you're working with other companies or when you're working with people alongside you in a co-working space. And until you've got 10 people or 50 people or 20 people, you know, and you've got your own sort of ecosystem and environment to get that encouragement and those idea generation, you know, you're kind of mad not to look at situating yourself in the midst of an ecosystem that can support you, I think.
Do remember though, Russell works out of his garage until it gets to $2 million, so you know, it's a bit of a balance.
Hopefully it's
there.
a nice garage.
Yeah.
Good luck with it.
Cheers, thanks.
Cheers. Another question.
Hi, I'm Sierra. I just had a question about the lifestyle comment. So lifestyle prejudice in Australia from Russel. So you said that in Australia there's a problem with how people perceive people who work too hard, people who try to succeed, try to achieve success in different ways. I just wanted you to elaborate on that. What is the sort of relevance of that in people wanting to create a really great idea and work really hard to achieve?
The relevance is, are you strong enough to do it alone?
Okay.
So basically, if people are negative, then some people will go under. So I'm an old guy, and so I've lived long enough in Australia before I left at age 28 that I spent my life in the lab, weekends, and I was strong enough not to take any BS from all of my dear male and female friends who wanted me to be out doing different things. A lot of people with great ideas might not be strong enough. Indeed, I've read on that topic, especially for women in Australia. A woman who wants to pursue a PhD in the life sciences in Australia, she doesn't get a lot of support for wanting to work all weekend in the lab. And that's just an experience of life. So
it's social support mostly that you're talking about, rather than it's not anything about investment or
no, that's dependent on the quality of the idea and what the asset is. But people need an environment where either they can say, F you, and go into the lab and do what they need to do, or they are brought down by it. And in Australia, there's a negative environment against people who spend their life doing what we guys do for their passion, and women in especially.
Okay, so for the rest of the people on the panel, what kind of things is Australia doing to combat that sort of attitude? Would that be the startup weekend, or is there anything else?
Yeah, well, perhaps I can add to that a little bit.
Yeah.
It's okay. So I guess Russell and I share a lot of common overlap in terms of the bio side. I can also see a lot of similarity of connection between what we're all discussing here today. From our perspective, there is the classical move into an environment that has to work nicely for, even if it's a smaller scale environment. There actually is infrastructure around, but we need more infrastructure, of course. So, for example, we have just over here, just literally about a 10-minute walk from here, is a great technology park. And in fact, historically, it used to be a very different kind of technology. It was old world technology. The architects still retain some of the old hints of the old world. Within that world is all this wonderful new world stuff being done. There is an infrastructure developed and provided within that. Sure, there can always be more, and there should be more provided along the way, without a doubt. There should be funding, but yet more funding. But at the end of the day, it's up to the community and the individuals to get up and do it. I see people who do just that. I do see people who get in on the weekends and work hard at it. And those are the guys and girls who go out there and succeed, I think. And some of them don't. But either way, though, you're out there trying to make it all happen. There is infrastructure around, but I think part of it also is that, as discussed, it's a smaller place here down under, so therefore there's less of a funding base, less of a whole range of things. But there's definitely that thing around. You've just got to seek out your networks, seek out ways to get the angel investors in there, the investors, seek out ways to limit your costs by means of a technology park, and then get the show on the road at that point.
I think on that culture front, and Russell has said he's been out of the country for a while, I think it's changed a lot, actually. It's interesting, having been at Sydney University 15 years ago, and whenever I come back and do events here, there's a lot less of a drinking culture. There's actually a change, and I know recent studies are showing a lot of Australians are working a lot longer hours. I know people who've come from New York and said, the thing I hate about coming to Australia and working is they work a lot longer hours than I used to in New York. And it's actually, I think there is actually a bit of the common perception of the Australian larrikin drinking is changing a lot in terms of actual reality of it nowadays. So I don't know, we'll see what happens. But it's an interesting thing just with everyone, and it's not just, it's not just startups as well. It's that idea of, when do you ever give up? Do any of you guys ever kind of pursue an idea for a certain period of time and then go, look, this one's not a winner? And the artistic example I know is that David Michaud, the director of Animal Kingdom, he was working on that script for 8 or 9 years. He was, to everyone, he was the weird guy who's been working on one script for 8 years. Suddenly he becomes the guy that does the best movie that goes to Hollywood and, goes crazy. But in that period beforehand, people would kind of look at him with pity going, I can't believe this guy is still just working on that one thing. How do you know, is there any way you can know when to drop the idea or move on to another one? Or do you ever do that? Or is it about having a tenacity to continue on that one idea?
I'll jump in first. What you do depends on your personality. And so my personality, to a fault, has been too much persistence. So I have taken certain business ideas and not been able to drop them or jump ship. So in my case, my advice to myself would be, jump in as I've done. I've come back to Australia and now I'm working actually at the technology park at the ATP that's nearby, working with a woman who's got a brilliant idea and trying to help her. It's my problem as a personality is I don't give up on things quick enough. I'm sure there are lots of other people that could do with a rocket up their backside to keep persisting and keep persisting. So it depends on you. All the things we're saying around this table, there's no magic one-size-fits-all formula. We're throwing out ideas and comments. There's no secrets. It depends on you and the people around you and the assets you've got and the time as to whether money is falling off trees or it's hard to dig out of the ground. Everything is time, people, place dependent. And everyone has to go into their heart and find what is the thing that matches up you and your talent and your deficiencies with the assets that you've created and the people around you to make the team a really strong team. And that's the thing that both of us have actually come up to. Because our fields require persistence over years, you're either the sort of person who is an ideas person in biochemistry, chemistry, who gets in and creates an idea and then is by definition made redundant 3 years later because now completely different expertise is required to take it into animals and then into man, or you're a person who steps up and then goes more into the business side that then can carry you through all phases of development of something. So everyone's path is different depending on the individual personality of everyone in this room.
A question from the floor there.
Hi guys, first of all, thank you for your time.
Come close to the microphone, mate.
Yeah, thank you for your time. My name's Ash, I'm just a recent grad from engineering at UCED here. My question was related to sort of your comment earlier, Whitney, and it's open to everyone. In terms of your pitch to VCs and angels, is there a difference in that pitch? If so, could you further explain that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I did the same pitch personally to the angel group and when I presented following up to the VCs. The main thing, I guess, that might be more useful to answer for you was over the course of talking with investors in America, it became clearer to me what I needed to emphasize more than I did at the beginning. And the things that I naturally missed out was a really honest, competitor analysis, like where I sit in the market. And in particular, like at my point, I'm so focused on this product, but I needed to be very clear about how this could make money. And I think that's the thing that a lot of early stage startups don't put enough effort into when investing, is to really say, while our approach may be to get users and then worry about this, this is exactly how we're going to be able to do that at that point. And so I think that may be more yeah. I'd say, but it was the same pitch.
Yep, Russell's got
I'd like to jump in. I'd add something to that. In general, your pitch should be tailor-made if you have the time, energy, and knowledge for the particular set of people that you're in front of at any time. In general, angels are different to VCs and having quite different demands of criteria of success and quality to angels. Second, if you're in front of any different angels, they all represent different investment theses. If you've got the time and energy, study why and how they invest and make a few things in your presentation to suit them rather than the next people you meet 10 minutes later.
Yeah, so then you might raise 100.
Yep, that's great advice.
You should also think about what your asks are too, and don't be afraid to walk away from a deal. You know, I think one of the critical things that the guys brought up earlier was smart money. You know, sometimes the right investment is actually not just capital. It's actually going to come with the relationships, the knowledge and the skill that that investor brings to your business and brings to your marketplace, and the connections that they can help you make. And sometimes that's going to be more important. And so you need to be, there's so many startups I've heard that have walked away from their first few deals, you know, when they've got to the term sheet stage and they've walked away from that. And it's actually been the right thing for them to do. The other thing which just ties into the sort of the earlier question, you need to define what success is for you as well. You know, is it just getting to a certain amount? Is it that you want to be bought out? Is it that you want to create a business that's going to, you know, generate millions of dollars of profit? Or are you just actually wanting to make a business that's going to go global, but you really want to keep it to 10 people? It's actually no shame to pick a different path. But you need to kind of think about, well, what does success look like for you when you're building your business, and go after that. And that's going to be completely different for each and every business that's out there and for each and every startup. And that's okay. With pitches, you should also look at General Assembly. They run courses out of Fishburners, but also there's a ton of material online that's free now. And if you go to the Google for Entrepreneurs website, just Google for Entrepreneurs, we've got a partnership in place with them where they're creating new content that will help around some of these sorts of things and talk about this. And it's not us talking about it, it's experts from all over the world that are, you know, producing this content to just help you understand what you should be doing when you're creating your pitch and how you go about it and what you should be looking for in your term sheets and things like that.
It's good. We've got to wrap up soon. We've got another question there.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is April. Actually, for this semester, my friends and I were doing a consulting program for Australia Aboriginal community. I don't know whether you guys have heard about it or not. The Marine Bridge, so-called Australia first and only Aboriginal winemaker. But the problem is that, not unlike the promising startup we talked today, basically they just have like very limited infrastructure and limited funding. So my question is like, can they have like more supports from the society apart from like government's grants, like public donation? Say some company like Google, does Google has any experience to support some of the Aboriginal community to really start up some business?
So my question would be, what in this case, because you're talking about a very specific community, is what is their greatest need? And you don't have to answer that, but the reason that I sort of say that is, in supporting any business, it's what is the need? Is it money? Because if it's money, they need to go after investors. If it's somebody helping them with their media campaign, they need to get alongside media people that can help them with that. Is it users? Is it exposure? You know, what is it that a community needs? And then seek out the resources. You know, we do a lot to help startups and communities, but quite frankly, we're just one part of the ecosystem here. There are a lot of people that are very supportive of young businesses, and it's about finding out matching the need with the right supporter or the right person that can actually, you know, really work with them and help them build a successful business. And I think that's really, really critical. Mentors, getting them a great mentor would be an amazing thing, I think, for a young business to help them understand what their market is, maybe look at it in a different light. So those are things I would be thinking about and trying to make those connections with people for them.
It is a lot about connections. We've got one more question, do we? Okay, one quick, sorry, are you?
Can I add something?
Yep.
Yeah, it's just like for that business, it's more like a social enterprise. They just try to sell some of the grape and then get like some ability to solve some like employee problem or get some of the funding to support themselves. So we have to think about like some mentor from like the universities or institutions, but we feel like, you know, basically they just start from zero. So it's quite a very bad situation.
I guess in that situation, it's unlikely that the kind of tech people here are going to have the experience, but that you should try and find people that work within that industry. So, for instance, in the winemaking industry or whatever, there, you know, people like Tyrrell's have an enormous amount of money and enormous imprint in the community, and speak to the people that have the expertise in those particular areas.
Like,
and I'm sure they'd be willing to help out with that. Yeah,
and look at some of the wine bloggers and the people that write out there, because I think, you know, if part of it is helping get the word out, there's people out there that would love to do that, and there's no shortage of them in the Australian. As somebody's acknowledged, we have got a drinking culture in the country, so there's no shortage of experts and businesses out there that would be probably well placed to help out.
Yeah, keep talking till you find the people that have the expertise, I guess. Last question, mate.
Hi. Yeah, I used to work at a solar startup in San Fran, and I was really impressed with their business model, and I was very tempted to start up something, I wouldn't say identical, but pretty much identical in Australia. Do you have any, like, is that quite common that people see a business model or see a startup that's kind of going kind of pretty well in Silicon Valley, try to bring it back here?
Yeah. Actually, perhaps I can comment on that one. So I lived for a while in the Valley, of course. I think Russell also did, and I think a number of us interact on a regular basis with the Valley. It's a kind of Darwinian thing, you know, if you see something great and you reckon you can do it better, go for it. You know, survival of the fittest. But, you know, if you believe you have a little angle on the thing that makes it a bit better than the rest along the way, people will run after the better delivery, the better products, the stuff that's already out there, as long as it's packaged the right kind of way.
So that's quite interesting, because my first instinct would have been to say, well, if you know these guys, you work with them, why don't you say, I'll start the Australian version of it? Would you think it's better to do that, or better to go, oh, look, I have a similar business over here?
I'm all for the idea of doing the whole thing ethically, absolutely. But at the same time, though, if it turns out that you've explored the idea of trying to do things in these kinds of ways, and there are opportunities to try and do things separately, and there's not a way to try and do things collegially, I guess I'm programmed more as a collegial kind of interactive kind of guy. It's my DNA. But there are situations where the collegial model just doesn't anymore apply. And under those conditions, I'd say don't give up, go for it. And in fact, by the way, if you think you're doing stuff, for those people in the room over here, remember there's a guy called James Alexander wandering around. He runs Incubate, he does that from his heart as well, and he should be one of your first stops to ask and say, I've got this great idea, I'd like to do something here locally, what kind of money, what kind of introductions might be around for me to get the job off the ground?
Yeah,
So
definitely.
encourage it.
And I think that's what we'll kind of end it there, and we'll end it on that note. There's a lot of people here that you can talk to. I'm not sure how long Tony, Russel, Whitney and Sally Ann have got, but try and grab them. Try and talk to other people here that might have an idea. Find somebody who has a similar idea. It's all about creating that network. Although, as Russell said, make sure you don't get rid of the idea too early, and particularly don't give it to that guy because he steals ideas. But just before behind, Russell and Tony said, let's catch up for coffee. That's how simple it is. They've got some idea going on. Try to maybe find out where that coffee is and listen over the back of them. But good luck with your ideas. Share ideas, find new people, and do consider using the Innovate thing at Sydney University Uni, because that is a pretty amazing thing to be able to get money out of the union and space and mentoring as well to get your idea going. So thanks for everyone for coming out here. Hopefully you have some ideas out of this and you can share your ideas or grow them some way. So again, thanks again to the Sydney University Union and Sydney University for having this, and of course TED, which we'll be crossing back to very soon. Thanks very much. Please thank our guests.
Thank you.